All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to The Blind Leading the Blind. We still don't know who's leading and who's following. It's your boy Kunal coming at you live from Washington, D.C., where the stench of gasoline is still heavy after that giant parade that apparently was very empty of people, though. There's a lot of vehicles, but not a lot of people. Take that as you will. And over there in the always smelling of gasoline state of New Jersey, it is.
Hello, it's Emily. Welcome back to the Blind Leading the Blind. Right now, I don't know, it smells like petrichor and rain because it's been nonstop raining where I'm at.
I
So,
mean, let's be real. New Jersey's a giant turnpike, and it just smells like gasoline.
okay, sure.
You listener, just
Depends on
prepare.
where you are in Jersey.
It's
Um,
never going to end. Emily here abandoned her Philadelphia-ness for New Jersey. It's just something else.
Listen, I
Um,
do like the color green. So, there's that.
there's green in New Jersey? What? I thought it's just all brown
It's
and
the Garden State. The Garden State.
that's a lie. They just say that just to prop up their image. I mean, in fairness,
I need to start including some imagery, and you can see what I see when I step outside my house. I do like the green.
listen, don't fall for the AI generated trap. And on that topic, a perfect segue into today's topic, which is going to be artificial intelligence, specifically generative AI, and how it's a controversial subject in creative fields, but also specifically for writing, I guess, is what we're going to be talking about. So
Hmm.
I have a lot of thoughts on AI, and I'm going to just like run through this real quick, just what we're going to be focusing on. But first off, we're going to be talking a little bit about what AI actually is and what it actually means in this case. It's a very loaded term. How does it actually work? People have a tendency to treat it as magic. It really isn't. You're going to be very surprised, dear listener, if you don't know how it works. Um, and there's a lot of interesting things that come up here where we have, things about like people's jobs being replaced by AI. But again, there's caveats on this. I want to ground us to earth because the Reddit sphere and the newsosphere and the Silicon Valley tech bro jackasses will all want you to believe something, which I have thoughts on. Let's just put it that way. Then there's like the concept of that a lot of the training for these models is basically copyrighted work. It's being used without
Hmm.
consent. There's the question of quality versus the authenticity, excuse me, of these pieces and whether is it actually any good what Gen AI comes up with. And who the fuck owns it? That's the real question.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's going to be a very interesting podcast, dear listeners. So, but we have our sponsorship from OpenAI. I'm kidding. You're not
Sponsorship.
sponsored. You're an independent podcasting service here, guys. Independent till we die. Don't tread on me. But I don't like
Oh
California.
my God. Yeah, so in terms of AI and writing, so Kunal kind of touched on a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about, why it's very controversial. There's the legal moral gray area about who owns it. So, and just focusing on writing, I'm going to touch more on, a few instances that have happened in which there has been, documented writer backlash in courts. Again, like Kunal mentioned, the use of copyrighted work to train AI models is not something that authors who did not receive compensation for really appreciate. We're going to touch on the erosion and of the writing craft. Again, the authentic voice. So, is something created by an AI model that was used to emulate the style of an author? Is that authentic? Um, then again, there's going to be a conversation on transparency and trust. So there have been some controversies because, writing institutions, say journalism or say magazines, they have relied on using AI to write certain stories that just weren't written by people and they didn't disclose that information. Obviously, that was an issue for them. Um, and then the last two things we're going to touch on before we end today is going to be AI not always being accurate and what that means for something that isn't, perhaps fiction, but maybe journalism. What happens when AI hallucinates and no one checks that and it goes out into the world. And the final thing we're going to talk about is just, look, AI is here. It's here to stay. It's like the new frontier. And
Yep.
so how do we think about these issues that we have? And how do you go forward as someone perhaps interested in writing or in the writing field, knowing that that's going to be there and still trying to protect yourself?
I mean, honestly, we could even expand this to basically every field out there. I mean, AI has impact
Yes.
literally every day. I mean, I'm actually a software engineer by day, and like you hear about it all the time that like AI is replacing jobs, AI is replacing jobs, AI is replacing jobs. So let's actually
Yeah.
segue into like, what exactly is AI and what this really means for what this really is, how does it work, etc. AI is a pretty broad term, right? I don't want to get too broad and like start like sound like a one-on-one lecture, but it does help to have some background on this. Um, AI itself encompasses a lot of different methods. If you actually look at the definition of AI, it's basically any agent that works towards a goal. Believe it or not, AI has existed for a lot longer than people realize. Your car's navigation algorithm or your phone's navigation algorithm, that's actually AI. It falls under AI. Or um, text to speech, that's been under AI as well, or speech to text,
Hmm.
that's also AI. Um, there's a lot of other things that have, I'm trying to think of other things that are really kind of in that realm, but search,
Would
actually.
you
Search.
say like Alexa is in that realm?
Absolutely. Alexa is an AI. Alexa is
Yeah. And
really,
Alexa's been around for a while. I feel like people really started thinking about it more when ChatGPT kind of like exploded.
yeah.
But Alexa was around long before ChatGPT.
Yeah, it's been around for more than a decade, I think, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Siri, that's another one, actually. Siri released
Siri, yeah.
in 2010, I think it was one of the first ones, 2010, 2011, and people didn't see it as AI. This is something called the AI effect, where another example actually came to mind was Google search. People have been using Google search a lot, and you don't think of it as AI, but no, that actually is AI. Search algorithms fall under the domain of artificial intelligence. Um,
Hmm.
it actually is AI. It's just that it's something that got marketed not as AI. This is something known as the AI effect, where, well, we're seeing it for the first time. This isn't the case, but we'll get to that. The AI effect, though, is where an algorithm that was researched and developed as part of artificial intelligence becomes labeled not as such. It becomes navigation, search, voice.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of reasons probably for this. I would have to look it up more deeply, but my theory is that it's mostly marketing, right? It just is a little bit more cooler to market something as a navigation algorithm or whatnot. Like navigation has
So
existed since 2006 or earlier, I'd even say. Yeah, go
on
ahead.
that note, do you think that maybe ChatGPT like stood out more as like actual AI as opposed to just GPSs and navigation systems because of how it interacts with the user? Like it talks to the
Yeah.
user as though they're having an actual conversation. And
Yeah.
if do you think that that alone maybe brought it to people's attention more, or
Yeah, I mean, I think there's three things. I mean, we are a pretty nerdy group here, so and we all love our sci-fi. Sci-fi, I think, is actually a big player in this. I'm actually dead serious. Where sci-fi kind of marketed true AI as being these things that can talk to you, and part of that is because of a gentleman by the name of Alan Turing. If you're a computer scientist,
mm,
you certainly know Alan Turing. He's the
we had to
father.
study him too
Oh yeah,
in the cog sci realm? Yeah.
yeah, because he's the father of computer science, artificial intelligence, and he posited, incorrectly, I think, but I'll get to why. He posited that if an AI can chat with a human and you cannot tell if it's AI or human, then it is
Hmm.
intelligent, truly intelligent and sentient, that is, and should be treated as such. Now, that's called the Turing test. And now, technically, let's be clear, ChatGPT has clearly beat the Turing test. I don't actually think it's actually intelligent though. And now I'm going to describe to you how ChatGPT, but also how other similar generative AI models work. These all fall under a class of algorithms known as large language models, specifically for text-based stuff. And they also are generally under generative models. I think it stands for, let me look it up. GPT, I think stands for Generative Practitioner AI. I'm gonna look
Oh.
this real quick. It's generative practitioner, generative pre-trained transformer. That's what it is. Now,
Hmm.
this is really important. Why it's called generative pre-trained transformer. Generative because it's generating text for you. Pre-trained because it's trained on a giant corpus. We in the biz call it corpus, or a large body of text. And
Latin for body.
exactly. Yeah, and it's become a thing in the oh so high-end lofty realm of machine learning researchers that they use these sort of Latin terms. The transformer
Hmm.
part actually refers to the core building block of LLMs. So I'm going to try to keep this as non-technical as possible. what all of these models are what's called a neural network, an artificial neural network. The brain, right? It's made up of a bunch of neurons, right? We all know this, biology 101. So the way that these are done on computers is that you have the same sort of idea where you're simulating a neural network, but again, it's fancier than it sounds. What you're really doing, if you know what a regression is, right? And for those of you who maybe have not done any statistics, the idea of a regression is you have like a mathematical equation, like um, the basic sort of thing, like ax plus y equals c kind of thing, right? Where a is the slope, or ax plus b equals y. It's like a is the slope, b is the offset.
Y equals mx plus b.
There it is. Yeah.
Slope. There you go.
The funny thing is, I'm the engineer here. We don't use
I
math.
just remember a lot of the stuff from school. I don't even know how I
Yeah,
remember. It's
y equals
weird.
mx plus b, right? Like, but that's
Yeah.
what it is, right? Where m is the slope, b is the offset. So what a regression will do is it will iteratively update the weight of m so that the line minimizes the error of all the points in a particular data set and that particular model. Now, this can be generalized to any equation. And a neural net is basically a form of an equation. I'm not going to get further beyond that. So you're basically doing a regression, right? Now, what is then a transformer? It's a kind of neural net where what it does is a transformer and also an autoencoder. What they're doing is they're basically what they're doing is they're taking text and they're trying to train it so that it can reconstruct that text as the output. And more broadly, the way LLMs work is that they're predicting the next most likely word in a string of words, in a sequence of words. So if you say to an AI, New Jersey is horrible, what do you think? It will predict back, yes, I agree, because that is objectively the truth. Um, Jokes aside, like, Sangre here is not impressed. Dear listener.
No, I just looked up what LLM stands for.
Large language
So
model.
it stands for a large language model.
Basically, the idea is that what an LLM or ChatGPT is, it is a very sophisticated predictive text algorithm. There's a lot of reasons why that is. They're using a little bit of a newer architecture. One of the largest reasons also is that it's just gigantic. This is millions of nodes basically running, right? They're running it in the cloud. But here's the thing, right? Like, and this is pretty similar for how image generation works. It's a very similar idea where it will take text and figure out how to construct an image using a very similar algorithm. Admittedly, I haven't studied that as closely, so I would have to look it up more deeper how that works. But it's also not very relevant to this particular podcast because we're mainly talking about writing. Here's the thing, right?
Hmm.
If I told you, right, if I marketed it this way that, you know, I'm going to give you a monkey that is very good at predicting the next word based on having read every single text in human history. Would you call that intelligent? Now, this is kind of where opinions will diverge, right? And
Hmm.
arguably, I would say no. I mean, like, that doesn't necessarily mean I understand the text, right? But at the same time, it turns out it's pretty fucking good at at least a lot of tasks out there, right? So,
Hmm.
like, that's how you have things that are capable of this chat GPT, which is now capable of like conversing with you in a very natural way, or writing a story, for example, based on a few words, because it's basically able to predict what seems like the most likely thing. And actually, what's interesting is, as we'll get to in later in the podcast, this is what leads to the AI being very generic, actually. You'll be able to tell an AI generated story from a non AI generated story because, well, shit. I mean, yeah, because it's just kind of taking the statistical average of what a good
Yep.
story should be. And what is that? That's fucking average,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's not
Yeah,
a,
to that point, I've experimented with ChatGPT.
yeah,
As you know, I'm working on my book, and I've just been curious, and I was like, all right, let me ask ChatGPT to write a setting. And I didn't use it in my book. I don't use ChatGPT in my book at all. But I was just curious. I was like, let me imagine a setting and let me ask ChatGPT to actually write the paragraphs for me. And I gotta tell you, it was weird.
yeah,
It was hard to put into words. There was something lacking. It felt like
soulless.
someone tried to take math and make it art. That's the best way I can put it.
It's soulless, basically, right? It doesn't have
Right.
authenticity, is the
Well,
thing.
and now I'm going to have mathematicians yelling at me saying math isn't soulless.
I
But
mean, in fairness, I mean, at some point, everything does become math if you dig deep enough, really. I mean, there is an argument to be made there, but
another podcast.
yeah, we can definitely get to that.
Everything is math.
You're gonna hate us.
Sucks for you if you didn't like math in school.
Yep. I mean, everything's math at the end of the day, right? Like, but so I've actually used AI too. I use it a lot. I will be honest. I don't have it write things for me at all, to be clear, right? Like
Yeah.
Denker over here, I don't actually have it write my book for me or anything like that. I
I don't think it can. That's the other thing.
No, it cannot.
Like, so I can touch more on like people hiding the fact that they're using AI to write their work for them.
Yeah.
But I like in terms of what Kunal is trying to write and what I write, I don't think it can do the job the way that we can.
No,
It
absolutely.
just it can't.
My story is a very personal story, right? Like it's a very personal, albeit sci-fi fantasy, but it is a very personal story. I will say what I do use AI a fair bit for is for ideating, for critiquing, for just kind of getting
Hmm.
another set of eyes on it, on your work before, and maybe thinking about things in different ways. It is actually really good at brainstorming and concepting stuff with me. Like I will do this for my art, where like I'm working on a concept piece for a villain character based off of, basically a couple of different ideas I had. So I had like, like a slime ball corrupt official, and I have a couple concept arts. It helps me kind of collect my thoughts into maybe we can add a top hat. Maybe we can make it like a
Mm.
little overweight. Maybe it'll have like a cane. It'll be like rotting flesh. And maybe you can look at these references.
Out
It's
of curiosity, when you're using it for concept, like ideation, do
Yeah.
you feed in just like textual description, or do you actually feed in an image that you were working on?
Nowadays, I actually give it my images too, so that it can see the silhouette that I'm coming up with, and like
Mm.
look at what it is helpful. It's like a good form of critique. And
Did you notice a major, sorry, did you notice a major difference from like when you only use text or when you use the image too, or is it pretty much the same?
well, text is much harder to like work for an image in particular, right? Like, but it is a great way to be able to get your thoughts on paper. And when you use images as well, it is very good at helping you come up with some extra ideas. Like I was working on a concept for Nomad Girl, and for those of you who don't know, you'll see it on my Instagram eventually. Um, but basically, like I was working on her backpack, which is based on like a Death Stranding hybrid with like a couple other ideas, and they pointed out that hey, maybe you can add a battery pack. And I'm like, that's actually a pretty good idea. And so I added
Mm.
the battery pack to give it some more character. Things like that. Like I fed it the backpack image, like, and it was able to point out that a battery pack could be kind of cool, or maybe like a solar cell. And like, that's not a
Hmm.
good idea for this character. It's very good, but here's the thing, right? Like, and this is kind of where I'm going to get into my big pet peeve when people consistently bitch that AI is going to replace the whole world or something. Number one, this isn't that smart. And I've told Zanka this before in private, but like, if AI really does replace most human jobs, this particular model, this isn't actually all that intelligent, right? If that really does happen, I think it says more about us as a species at this point than it does about AI. It just means we've gotten stupider, really, is what really it means. And maybe it's true, right?
Hmm.
Maybe a lot of our jobs really just aren't that stupid. But if you work with it, yeah, like that's where I think you'll see the productivity gains, right? I use it.
Yeah, so yeah, to respond to that point exactly, I don't think it's going to replace all jobs, but what I have heard it put in this way is that the people, say for a lawyer, for example, or a writer, lawyer, writer, doctor,
Yeah.
whatever profession you have, the lawyer or doctor that uses the AI is going to outperform the lawyer or the doctor that doesn't use AI. So
Exactly.
it's not going to replace them, it's going to be a tool. And it reminds me of like the onset of the internet, and everyone's like, oh my God, the internet, like, what's this going to mean when it first came out? And like now we all use it. People still have jobs. In fact, there are now new jobs that came from having the internet. So it's just the next frontier. And
Yeah.
the reason why people, they freak out is because that's very human. It's
Very.
very human to freak out about something that you don't understand because let's be real, how many people that are using ChatGPT understand the ins and outs and the technical everything about ChatGPT? Who understands, who's studied, who's an expert on the
I agree.
the economic impact of it or the business impact of it? most people are not professionals at that. They haven't spent most of their life understanding it.
Right,
And so it's new, it's powerful, obviously.
right.
And it can be scary because people are scared of change and things that they don't understand sometimes. But I see it more as a valuable tool that will help us get even farther. In
And
fact, it's just going to help us become that much, show that we can be that much smarter. Now that we have, mhm,
and to your point, right, like, about, fear and scare. Look, I'm gonna be fully level with you. I've been scared, right? I genuinely have gotten scared at times that, like, man, I don't know if my job's gonna exist in a few years, right? And
mhm,
like the reality is that, like, it is scary, right? Because it's a new thing. We don't know how it's gonna work out. Even I, as somebody who's maybe not a self-professed expert, but I understand this better than the average person does. The average person, this is basically just magic, right? At this point. And I mean,
yeah, yeah.
I'm not trying to be flippant here, right? I'm being genuine that it's basically magic for the average person, and understandably so, right? It's not.
Yeah, I mean, like most people don't have the time to invest in becoming an expert in everything. It's just
I
not
mean,
possible.
it is also more complicated than maybe I'm giving it credit for, right? Most people probably will not remember what a regression is if they studied it. I mean, I didn't even remember y equals mx plus b, to give you an example, and I work as an engineer. I mean, no, we laugh, right? But like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's a valid point, right? I don't remember this math either, right? It's scary, right? But I
Hmm.
think it is important to keep in mind that AI on its own is actually not all that capable. I use it a lot for my writing too. I use it for world building. Sometimes I'm like stuck on a world building concept. Like the other day, I was trying to understand. I have a concept in my world for my book, These Dark Shores, where I'm like, well, I have these oceans of black metal sand, but I don't really understand how they'll work. How should it be that they're traversable? What should be the fear? This is, and I basically I gave ChatGPT the full background. I described it to everything that I already thought of, and it worked with me. And it's like, well, maybe it's electromagnetic storms. Maybe
Hmm.
the sort of veil between reality and the immaterial is thinner here.
So
And
you're using it as like a writing partner, someone to
exactly,
bounce ideas off of.
like a
Hmm.
muse, basically, right? It's like your
Right.
muse. What the heck? Sorry, I was getting a phone call from somebody for some reason. Just started to voicemail. Um,
Oh, hmm.
um, anyways, but the point being that, like, that we we do have a tool that we can use here. I actually have generated stories off of ChatGPT too, not for my main writing project. There's another thing I'm working on, which was more for my mental health more than anything else, I think, right? I was doing
Hmm.
it so that I could process some events this past year. And so it basically, I wrote a series of news reports about different events in a very dramatic setting in like a sci-fi fictional universe. And I
Hmm.
printed the whole story to ChatGPT, and I'm like, how about you generate this scene from this person's perspective, that scene from that perspective. I agree, it's not very good at this point. Like what it wrote was not actually a very good scene. It was
Hmm.
bad, to tell you the truth, actually. Um,
Hmm.
but it does give you, again, perspective. It's inspiration then for me to take that and go and write something more or to add more
Hmm.
world building. So there is uses for it. I think corporate America, though, and a lot of other people are, maybe selling this as something that it's not, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so actually, let's go into examples of writer backlash because this, you mentioned, I have had fears about my job. Is my job going to exist? And we're talking about, well, maybe it will exist, but it'll exist in a different way. So I'm going to go in and talk about some of the lawsuits that have resulted from writer backlash to AI. I'm going to start. I know we mentioned Neil Gaiman has a bit of a controversy, but I'm going to start with a quote by him because I think it's a pretty good representation of how a lot of authors are feeling. So he said, if an AI can write like me, it's because it's been trained on me, and that's theft, not homage. Um, Now I guess you could make that bigger and say, well, a lot of artists copy other artists. We don't even have to be talking about AI in that regard.
Yeah.
But people are concerned that AI is basically copying training their models on their copyrighted work. So in 2023, the Authors Guild of America, which I believe is like the largest author organization in the United States. I think also the oldest, representing almost, I believe, 9,000 people about.
Sure.
And some of the prominent writers included George R. R. Martin, John Grisham, Jodi Picoult, Michael Connelly.
Biggest name.
Um, yeah, big names. I mean, there were many others, but some of the big names are right there. And they brought a suit, again, lawsuit against OpenAI. And their allegation basically was, hey, you can't use our copyrighted material to train without our permission and without getting any sort of compensation to train ChatGPT. And that kind of relates to, again, like that controversy. Oh, who owns it? Who owns what it makes? Is it the person who, programmed ChatGPT? Is it the person who made the information that ChatGPT is being trained on? Is it the person who entered the prompt? But basically, ChatGPT would summarize and reproduce parts of their work, parts of their books.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
yeah.
And the CEO of the Authors Guild, I will probably quote her one more time because she has some great quotes for this particular topic. Mary Rosenberger, she said that generative AI is an extinction level threat to authors unless we get control of how our work is used. So I think at present, I don't know
That's
if the
interesting.
end result of this suit has like officially concluded, because there's also a few other ones that are going on right now that haven't concluded. WGA, the Writers Guild of America, they went on a strike in 2023. That's more in like the film industry, not necessarily books. But that also kind of covers some issues that the film industry in general is having. It's not just with writers.
Sure.
And then the last thing that I thought was like a pretty big example of this was Book Talk and Amazon. So, Kunal, you mentioned, I think earlier about how, people were using AI to like write whole books. And so Amazon actually has this ability for people to self-publish. It's called KDP.
Yep.
And so people were actually having like ChatGPT write a book for them,
And publish.
and they would write. And that was a really big problem, obviously. And there was confusion among readers. There was fear from authors, like authors who actually wrote their own books, that they would be drowned out because then Amazon's platform would be, saturated with AI generated text. So in, I think, September of 2023, Amazon updated its KDP policy, and
Yeah.
it said it's not perfect, right? It said if you use AI to write the book, you have to disclose it.
Right.
But it didn't say you have to disclose anything if you use AI to help you write the book.
Which is kind of a gray area at that point, right? Like
Right.
what constitute, I mean, technically, like, I use AI to help me write the book, but I'm not like having ChatGPT write entire chapters, right? I mean,
Right.
like, what if you do like, I write a chapter, ChatGPT writes a chapter, is that me writing the book, or is it and the AI helping, or is AI writing the book? It's a very it's interesting that people find this to be an existential threat, and I think the problem is less AI itself, but it's also like to quote Gandhi, right? It's not that capital is evil itself; it's the way it's used, right?
Hmm.
Something like that is the quote from Gandhi. Um, the problem basically is that if we're training an AI to mimic, let's say George R. R. Martin, right? Then
Hmm.
arguably that is kind of a theft, right? I mean, it's especially theft, if you're not disclosing it, right? And you're saying that, hey, y'all, George R. R. Martin published this new book on horses, right? As an example.
Right. So that actually did happen to what was Jane Friedman. So
Mhm.
to Jane, she writes nonfiction.
Okay.
Someone actually used ChatGPT and had it, I don't know if it's ChatGPT. I think it's ChatGPT, but they use AI to
Easy.
basically write a book in her style.
Yeah.
Then they put that book on Amazon under her name and try to sell it. Now she has since gotten it taken down, but that's an issue. Like
Right.
that person can't be the only person who had that thought.
Right. I mean, and that's basically identity theft in a way, right? Like,
Right.
I think that what really is coming up here is that there is a new form of identity theft that is now going to come up with AI. I mean, on a whole,
Hmm.
where it can mimic your likeness, your persona. I'm sure it won't be that long before like we have AI models that can generatively, show me on a video call, for example, and then mimic my voice mimicry is already.
I think they already have that. I think because I saw some videos talking about how not to go into like a darker corner of AI, but people were using it to make like underage pornography.
It's a
Like
thing.
they're making AI.
Yeah,
Yeah, they were
it's more
taking
thing.
faces.
I mean, it's funny every time new technology comes out, the first thing we apply it to is sex and porn. I think there's something about it. I
You
think
know, this reminds me.
people
Like
say
this reminds me. Go ahead, go ahead.
people say that AI is going to take over the world. It's going to be like Skynet. It's going to be this. No, AI is going to fuck everyone over in a very literal way is what's going to happen.
Do
If
you
there's
see how often sex robots are? There's actually a movie. There's a movie literally called AI. It's like I watched it when I was a kid, and sex robots are like a very prominent
part of that,
thing, and as, from what I remember, yeah. And
yeah,
so it's funny because this reminds me of a scene in and ironically Game of Thrones. And I think it was like on the TV show. And it was like Tyrion and Bronn having a conversation and they were like, everything is just dicks.
I
And
remember that. Yes,
do you remember that?
yes, yes. It's Tyrion, Braun, and Jamie, and
And
Jamie.
Jamie, yeah.
It is really about cocks at the end of the day. Like,
Yeah, everything's just cocks at the end of the day. It's
that's what it
like,
is. I mean, if AI actually becomes sentient, dear listener, it's going to be a sex bot probably, and it's just going to be the horniest fucking thing ever.
oh my God. I don't think
Okay, we're gonna censor this part out.
you're right. Listen, when I put this video on YouTube, I say it's not for children. So,
Yeah, but the point that I think is kind of interesting, right? Like, is that it is kind of funny actually. Like even the internet, the first thing we used it for was uploading sex videos of all the things. Like the
but
first,
you know, it's also like funny, like silly, stupid shit. Like, do you remember when Instagram had their whole like I forgot what it's called. Like, you could like filter your face, and they had like the little bunny ears and the
I
cat
remember
ears
that.
and
I remember
whatever.
that too. Yeah, but,
Yeah, and like, mhm,
but yeah, like to tie it back to like what we're talking about. We're talking about like we're talking about the debate over who owns the work of an AI model, right? This is realistically what we're looking at now is a very complicated form of identity theft, right? And this is hard, right? How do you define who owns it, right? If I if I have a bot that generates a wholly original work based on some prompts I put into it, and let's say, and I've done this, right? I put in like a whole story, my own story. I put it in, right? And it outputs a scene based on the story. Kind of bad scene, but sure, it does, right?
mhm,
Um, Now, but it's probably taking inspiration from the data it was trained on. That would
mhm.
include, George R. R. Martin. It would include Stephen Erickson or Michael Connolly or John Grisham or so on and so forth. But is that theft at that point? I mean,
See, it's complicated because so obviously we all kind of agree that like plagiarism is bad, right?
right.
But then it's like, okay, well, what happens if there's certain authors that like kind of just happen to have the same style? What if they just happen to have the same idea? Like, how do you police that even?
This is interesting.
Because even, yeah, because even right now, I think it was another lawsuit in which, I think, yeah, Sarah Silverman, she brought a lawsuit against OpenAI and Meta.
Okay.
And so in the suit, it was revealed that there was compelling evidence to believe that Meta had tried to get rid of evidence to hide evidence that they had actually used her work. So this is just, and like, this is Meta. I mean, like, I don't know how much trust people have in Meta at this point, but it just goes to show that, like, people are not going to be honest about this stuff, especially when there's money on the line. And that's one of the biggest concerns. I mean, like, yeah, you and I were both American based and, we grew up in capitalist society and whatnot. But I think that's another really scary thing. It's like when there's financial interests involved, when people perhaps in this case of like the WGA strike, when they don't have enough money perhaps or budgets are being cut, they're
Yeah.
going to look for ways to get the work done cheap. And if AI can help them do that, but they don't want to be in hot water for using AI,
Just don't disclose
you
it.
think they're not going to lie?
And so here's the other thing, right? Like on that, I got 3 points that I want to go through real quick. The first point,
Hmm.
oh, excuse me. The first point is that like we have, I mean, you raise an interesting point that we both are America based, right? And yeah, sure, America has a lot of problems, and we can, leave that to Pod Save America, for now.
Oh my
But,
God, right now.
but
Yeah.
Pod, Go Save America. Okay, they failed. But so here's the thing, right? Like the thing that I think sometimes we forget. I mean, when we're bitching about everything, right? We do have some pretty strong laws in place.
Sorry. That was funny how you said that.
I mean, it's true. Sometimes we do forget the privilege of being in a developed country. We have some pretty
Mm,
strong laws actually in place, whether that's, labor laws or they could be better, right? But like compared
hmm
to say like, a sub-Saharan country where let's say, some company sets up a writing farm to just kind of input their text, original ideas into an AI, which then generates something based on that. They get paid pennies, right? It becomes a new form of almost like, and we already see this, by the way. It's
hmm
not for cloth factories. Now we're going to see it for probably things like assembling stories, right? Instead, it
hmm
the problem also becomes that there will be, irresponsible actors in countries where laws are maybe not as strong, right? I mean,
hmm
I don't want to call out Russia, but Russia, for example, is very famously known, or China even for that matter, they're very famously known for disregarding copyright laws. They
hmm
Here's the thing,
Oh,
right?
I could talk about this
Absolutely.
in terms of copyright laws and fashion and what fast fashion has done.
Yeah, that's a
Oh,
big
that's a whole topic.
Yeah, that's a big one too. I mean, and to my sort of my like, continuing to my second point, which is that, well, what's to stop somebody from like, I mean, a book is published, right? It's usually published
hmm
in paper. Let's say, let's just assume for a minute there's no digital copies out there. Just assume, right? Somehow there isn't, right?
Yeah.
What's to stop somebody from manually typing that whole novel into ChatGPT. Or I
hmm
don't even really need to do that. You can use OCR and scan the book in, and now suddenly it's in there. There's not really a lot that you can do here, right? And so the question becomes, right, like, which is that, like, when you're doing something in the style of someone else, really the only thing that we can really do at this point is just kind of have aggressive laws that detect these. I bet you that there are ways that you can use AI to fight AI. You could probably have AI detect that this was likely an AI generated model generating this text in the style of this, and this is actually theft, right? But at the same time, it's only really a tool, right? Like,
hmm
if it's just if those neurons inside the digital model are coming up with inspiration from, I don't know, fucking N.K. Jemisin, right? You know, is that really just plagiarism? And this gets into my third point, which is kind of on how plagiarism itself is very vague, right? I'm going to get into a controversy, and I kind of feel bad because I actually have met this author in person, and he's a really cool person. So R. Verdi, I've talked about it on this podcast.
I knew you were gonna bring, yep. I was thinking about it.
Yeah, I've talked about him before. He has his Tales of Tremaine series. I've read his book, The First Binding. I'm reading The Doors of Midnight. There's another author who many fantasy readers know. His name is Patrick Rothfuss, who is now somewhat hated because he has not released the third book yet.
Wait, didn't he write?
The King
Oh
Killer.
my God.
I,
The Name of the Wind.
yes, that's the name of the wind. Yeah,
Yeah, okay, wow. I was like,
you've read it.
sorry, I started reading it and
Okay, well, it's one of my favorite books actually, but he has not released the third book, and I'm pretty certain at this point he probably won't. Um,
hmm
So, I mean, it's a very beloved series. People who love that series, they really love it. They really love the writing style. They love the sort of plot points and whatnot. And there actually is another series that is somewhat similar. It's actually Empire of the Vampire by I forget who the author is. I didn't like the book very much, so it didn't really stick in my mind. But I do have the second book. Um, but R.R. Verdi's book is actually very similar to this trilogy, and he's been pretty open about it that he's been inspired by it, right? But it's more than just inspiration, right? It is a very
hmm
quickly following the same plot points, right? Where there's a guy, he's grows up an orphan, his family is killed by these beings who are only known in myth. He goes to a school for magic, and he gets up to all sorts of mischief. He survives being poor. There are differences. There are key differences in fairness. I think people don't give it as much credit. Like there's differences with the whole Sparrow arc did not exist in the original King Killer Chronicle. But there has been a lot of debate on Reddit and a lot of internet forums that this is just plagiarism. Technically, no, it actually isn't because R. Verdi is using his own writing. He's using his own setting. He has his own sort of universe. The magic system is very very similar. It's actually maybe is extremely similar actually. But because it's its own setting, it's its own writing, it has its own characters, there are different things enough are different. It's just a retelling of the same story. So is a retelling now plagiarism? As
Hmm.
per the law,
Hmm.
no, it is not, right? So this is
And
kind
so you enjoyed the Verdi version.
I mean, yeah, I like it for a lot of reasons. And I have a little bit of bias here, admittedly, because I'm very much looking for books that take South Asian sort of settings and mythos
Hmm.
and apply them.
Hmm.
And so I enjoyed it for that reason. And so
Mm.
I like
But the knowledge that, the even knowing about this controversy, it doesn't necessarily take away from your enjoyment of the book.
a little bit, I think, yes, in the sense that I've read the first,
Okay.
books. I've read the original books before, and admittedly, I kind of know what's going to happen, right? So
Hmm.
it's a little bit. It does take away from like me reading a page-turning novel, right? So now the question that comes in is that at this point, which is that we the reason that this is relevant is that we talk about, well, is AI plagiarizing? Is RR Verity plagiarizing?
Hmm.
And
But then you also mentioned that there are a lot of people who do think so,
that's
right?
exactly.
Maybe not in a legal sense, but they do feel like it's
But
plagiarism.
here's the thing: a lot of booktubers, and like very prominent voices have defended R.R. Verity. Many people have.
Hmm.
There's not a clear-cut answer, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
So this kind of again, like kind of going back a little bit in the conversation, this reminds me of fast fashion
Yeah,
in that people have access to the information that there are certain practices that might be a little bit frowned upon, but
yeah,
that are like technically not egregiously, like on paper, letter of the law plagiarism, right? Now, of course, in the fast fashion industry, there actually have been letter of the law plagiarism cases.
I'm sure.
Again, that's a whole separate thing. But there's also a certain gray area in which, certain fashion designers or fast fashion businesses have used inspiration. That there's a whole thing about dupes. Get the dupe for this makeup thing, get the dupe for that bag, get the dupe for this outfit, right? And the
Right.
dupe is basically, it looks really similar, but it's a much lower price.
Mm.
And this is what I feel like is going to happen in the writing industry in every part of writing. So journalism, in film writing,
Yeah.
in novel writing, I do, but then at the same time, I feel like as we continue and as people like you and I continue this discourse, people are going to be more aware of it. But because of the financial incentive, I think people are going to kind of turn a little bit of a blind eye. And I think that this is what's going to happen. Like we're going to I think it's inevitable.
And I think to your point on fast fashion, right? Like what's interesting here is that we've already kind of had this happen in writing, right? I guess my point about the R.R. Verity point is that the idea of a dupe, that's kind of what you're seeing. And it's not the first
Mm,
time. We've seen this happen in writing before. A particular book trend will take off. Like there probably are 1,000 A Song of Ice and Fire clones out there. I'm willing to bet my
mhm.
money. I'll stake my life on it. There's probably a ton of clones, right? You know,
You know what's interesting about this? To your point, I would agree with that. I do think this is already something that exists. Think about really prominent writers in history, like, for example, Shakespeare.
yeah.
How many times has Romeo and Juliet
Been reading.
already been written
Yeah.
and written and rewritten and reimagined?
And that's a good point, right? That's a very good point. It's a classic. Are we now is I mean, unless Shakespeare rises from the grave and
And it's like, you can't use
honestly,
my IP without giving me
honestly,
compensation.
guys, I want to see a zombie Shakespeare. I don't know about you guys. Zombie Shakespeare, the movie, coming soon to the blind leading the blind. You just have like a decay Shakespeare, like,
Decaying Shakespeare.
thou shalt not steal my Romeo.
Great.
I would love to see World War
Oh my
Shakespeare
God.
edition. Now that is something I would pay some good
Well,
money.
then that's actually interesting, right? So I did read briefly during the pandemic about copyright law. I was just interested. And I think it was
No,
like
out of it.
after about 70 years of something being IP, it becomes part of public domain. And I
Unless,
know this is something that like Disney has fought a million times for Mickey
so
Mouse.
I
That's a
want to
whole,
I want to
yeah,
comment on Disney. Disney, what they
yeah,
do is they just keep re-releasing something ever so slightly different, so that they renew the public domain, and they keep losing it.
yeah.
And on that note, fuck Disney.
That's a whole other podcast. That's a whole other
It's
podcast.
just gonna be me saying fuck Disney at the start, and at the end,
Yeah.
fuck Disney. But
But so that's interesting though, because the 70 years, so there's like a timestamp, right? So it's like, okay, after 70 years, I guess George R. R. Martin won't be here in 70 years, right? Like he was part of the
70
Authors
years.
Guild.
He
I
ain't
mean,
gonna be
maybe he
here for
will.
like
I don't
7
know.
years.
Maybe he'll be like like part cyber George. I don't know. But
I can
let's assume George R. R. Martin is not
imagine
going to live for
Elon,
another 70 years.
imagine Elon Musk, uploading this guy's brain into like a vat or something.
Oh my God. Wait, this makes me think of Pantheon. Wait, I'm getting too distracted, but that's such a good TV show. Anyway, but if it's about like the author being alive, like, are we okay with plagiarism, kind of, if the person that could financially benefit from it is dead? But then people can make the argument, okay, well, what about Michael Jackson? What about
They brought Tupac.
Marilyn Monroe?
They brought back Tupac's hologram for what was it, Coachella one time.
Oh, did not know that.
This was
Interesting, but then yeah. But then so that the point is like, do we care less about plagiarism when the author's dead?
well, so
Is that what it is?
I think that the problem, right, is like that we need more, and this is kind of I think where I don't want to sort of punt this, but this is where legislation is really the most important thing. We need regulation, legislation and unfortunately Congress
Absolutely.
now, but that's really where this comes in.
Honestly, they're so behind in terms of legislating this. I don't know if it's just because of how fast paced the tech industry is and
Yeah,
how quickly we've made progress. And
but
dare I say it, how kind of
and,
non-digital natives are filling our legislative bodies.
I mean, like to get,
But they're really slow with this. And I think what was it? It was like at this point, okay, I don't know if this is true or not. So if you, dear listeners, please fact check me. But from what I had read, the big beautiful bill, which is supposed to be going up to the Senate soon, or is already in the Senate for consideration, there's
yeah,
supposed to be something in there that basically says that like states cannot legislate AI
there
for
is.
like the next 10 years.
There is, yeah. They're deregulating AI for 10 years,
Yeah, and it's like,
which is arguably that's kind of what happened in the 90s with the dot-com boom, right? And that's probably what we're going to see in the next 10
yeah.
is the AI boom and then the AI meltdown. But that
Mm-hmm.
that will make a separate podcast series called The Blind Economist Leading the Blind Economist.
Economist.
And I'll quote one of my favorite YouTubers for economics. Nobody can predict the future, least of all economists. But writers will do it anyways. I'm going to add there. But so I think like the thing is that that's kind of like on our point on transparency and trust, right? The problem I think is that number one, technology is just moving very quickly, right? And it's in the
Yeah.
hands of people who are not necessarily trustworthy. Not to say that any individual really is
Yeah.
trustworthy, but that's kind of part of the problem. The second part of the problem is that our senators are ancient. They look like they were exhumed from a grave. I mean, like
Seriously, like I don't want to be ageist, but like we live in a
digital.
world in which
Yeah.
there's yes,
I mean,
exactly.
these are people who I remember they were doing a hearing with the tech company CEOs, right? And the guy was like, "Why is it when I search on my iPhone that Trump, when I search idiot, a picture of Trump comes up?" And some of the guy was like, "We don't make the iPhone." Right? Like they're running
God.
circles around these people, right? Like because they're so far
Yeah.
accurate, right? And the problem
Yeah.
here is that, we are moving towards a very technocratic society, right? Where there's a big gap between understanding and lack of understanding. It's something I touched on earlier too, right? AI is not really magic. Gen AI is actually astonishingly pretty simple, in the sense that
Yeah.
if you actually spend a little bit of time on it, right? And look, admittedly, this comes from a very elitist, privileged point of view, but it's actually not a very smart thing. It's not like we've kind of invented sentient life here, right? It's just a parrot bot at the end of the day.
So my concern, going back to the political aspect of this, is that we've seen how involved the tech giants of the United States were in the last like presidential race.
Yeah, there's a lot coming up on that.
And so yeah, and so like, do you think then that our ancient legislators are going to be more or less incentivized to protect the people
So,
from harm,
so
from
here's
tech
my
harm?
So here's
because I feel as though the tech industry giants are going to want to be not legislated. They're going to want more free reign, and they're already there where the political powers is
I think
gathering together.
so. I think this is. I don't really want to dive into this too much. The reason being, we, I think globally, but especially in the U.S. and maybe even in Western Europe, or in Europe in general, we are in a very odd place historically and geopolitically where we don't really quite know what's coming next. And so
Yeah.
can see a lot of futures coming. We're in a very precarious point in history in general, right? And so will legislators protect us? I mean, there's a lot of open questions generally about what's going to go down next. I'm not going to really try to open that can of worms. And what I will say though is that realistically, a line has to be drawn somewhere, right? Somebody has to draw that line. Maybe it won't be legislators.
Yeah, I'm
Maybe it
I'm
will.
not optimistic about it because look
Well,
at the privacy controversies.
yeah, no,
That's a whole other thing in tech, like an issue for people. How many different fines has Facebook been slapped with? How many times has it been brought into the news how they were not being transparent with users? Like this is just something like tech world in general. Like everyone is online these days, and I mean obviously AI is a part of the tech world.
yeah.
I'm not optimistic that we're going to get these protections through legislation, even though I feel like that's how it should be. That would be great if it were that way. I feel like a lot of this is going to be on individual people
That's what I was gonna say.
researching and trying to, yeah,
That's what I was gonna say, right? Like it's gonna probably be a lot of, citizen action, I think, right? Is where I
right, right.
like where we have to draw a line. And to be very clear, I mean to get back to like I think a little bit more on AI and writing, right? Where do we draw that line? I think that the line basically has to be drawn between explicit, mimicry and like
Hmm.
just kind of ideation and even generation of text, because somebody's prompting it and working with the AI that is using it as a tool, right? Like it is still being, I mean, like this kind of comes into the debate, was is computer generated imagery real art or not, right? Or whatever. I mean, I
Hmm.
think that prompting an AI and working with, if you're able to produce something that genuinely moves people, and you're doing it largely independently, there is something to be said about that. But so
Hmm.
I do think that like there is a line that has to be drawn basically where if you're working with the AI and generating something that's built off of your own ideas and your own thought process, that's I think fully fair game. That I think is we're already
Hmm.
I already talked about it earlier and whatnot. And I mean, realistically, if you want to ask about like, what the impact of AI was going to be, the biggest one is that I think Google search is going to die, actually, because ChatGPT
Hmm.
is just a better alternative to searching. Like, if I have a question about like, hey, why is the climate in the Sahara the way it is? Much easier to go to ChatGPT and just get a quick summary, right? Than it is to go to
Yeah, I've moved.
yeah, right. Like, I mean, that's where we're really headed, I think, right? But what we really
Hmm.
will have to do is, and I think that we'll probably see businesses sprout up around this, is we'll have algorithms that detect, was this generated by AI? What percentage is likely? Was it generated to mimic a particular style? What styles are we seeing? Stuff like that will come up. It's going to be citizen
Hmm.
action, right? I imagine that booksellers will start labeling their books that certified AI free. I mean, the
Yeah,
MPAA,
yeah, I was just thinking that.
I mean, like, I
It's
mean,
good. You're gonna pay a premium for a certification. There's gonna be a certification stamp that's like no AI was used in the making of this product.
like, it sounds ludicrous, right? But I mean, think about it. The concept of the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, that's not a government body. That's just all
Hmm.
movie theaters kind of opted in to
Yeah.
work with them, and they set up their own sort of rating guidelines, right? So that they can reach
Yeah.
viewers. That's what's going to happen. Is that the publishing industry is going to recognize that there's a demand for non-AI work, probably, right? And
Right. And I think that there's gonna be a premium on that because it's gonna cost more to make than something that is AI assisted or AI created. And I
absolutely,
think that kind of brings us into our next kind of point about like the authentic voice,
right.
right? So like what's authentic? Everyone has this idea, I want the authentic thing, so it's going to be like the thing that is not AI involved.
Right.
And this is again, like a lot of writers have provided, insight into like, hey, AI writing is not authentic to like the human experience, right? So I did mention earlier in the this episode that I was going to quote the Authors Guild CEO Mary Rosenberger
Right.
twice. So this is a second quote from her, which I think kind of again summarizes this topic. And she had said that the various GPT models and other current generative AI machines can only generate material that is derivative of what came before it, and they copy sentence structure, voice, storytelling, context. The outputs are merely mixes without any addition of human voice. And the final point she made was regurgitated culture is not replacement for human art. Right.
Right.
So you can see how from people who spend their lives creating in this space, who's people who spend their lives writing, there's obviously going to be the sense that, like, listen, and as you and I said, by the way, you said you tried to have ChatGPT write a scene for you or from one of your characters' perspectives, and it didn't sound right.
Not
It
really.
wasn't great. I had the same experience. And so basically, like, this is what people are saying. It's not the quality that you can get from a human author.
Well,
If you're
yeah.
fine getting a lesser quality and you're aware of the fact that AI had a heavy hand or some hand in writing it, some people are going to opt for that if it's faster, easier, more convenient, cheaper, whatever.
I mean, my theory on this, right, is that for one, I suspect AI will probably get better at this as time goes on, right? Or maybe not.
Yeah,
Or
there's
maybe
that.
not. It's entirely possible it doesn't too, because there's only so many books you can train an AI model on. The AI models that you see on ChatGPT that are so smart, right? They're smart, quote unquote, and are conversant. At this point, OpenAI has scraped the whole internet, and actually, they've reached a plateau. If you look at like the latest articles, the new models are not improving on the previous stuff, right? Now,
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
yes, there's actually a very real plateau now. And so the AI boom may soon become the AI bust, I think, right? And this is why I mentioned the dot-com boom of the
Oh.
90s and the dot-com meltdown. It's
Hmm.
gonna happen, okay, guys. Like, it will change your life. Don't get me wrong. It's gonna change your life. It's gonna bring a lot of very different ways that we work. It's gonna change the way search works. I think it's gonna change the way content generation works. There was an article actually where people are like, well, is there even a point to having a website if no one's going to visit it anymore? And ChatGPT is just like pulls you the summary. And it's like, I'm like, oh, that's a good,
Mm.
actually. I mean, like, why would I? I'm already doing it. I don't even really go to websites at this point. And so
Hmm.
it's going to change things, I think, in ways that we haven't really foreseen yet. Right. And I think that the notion that, that AI can only be derivative, I understand where she's coming from, but at the same time, it's I'm gonna shift gears a little bit to VFX industry. There's a YouTube channel which kind of does a lot of breakdown of film VFX, and this guy actually did a video essay specifically about how a lot of studios are lying about how much CG they really use. I'm gonna give you an example that everyone here knows and loves probably. Top Gun Maverick. I'm sure you've seen it. Um,
Yeah.
in Top Gun Maverick, Tom Cruise is famously like, these are real fighter jets. We didn't use any CG. We're actually in the planes. We went and filmed it. It's complete bullshit, actually. It turns out. I watched the film breakdown, and here's the real
Why would
complicated.
he lie?
Huh?
Why would he lie?
Oh, well, that's simple. It's the reason we talked about. People don't want quote unquote authentic stuff, right? They don't want computer
Yeah,
generated.
but it's easy to disprove. Anyway, continue.
Oh,
Yeah.
actually, that's the thing. It's not. That's what's so interesting.
Yeah, but you know.
Well, I'll tell you about this. It's interesting about how this happened, right? So in Top Gun Maverick, they did actually go up in real fighter jets. Tom Cruise and all those actors were in the backs of fighter jets. A lot of that is true, right? They did film it and whatnot. They have real fighters doing some of the maneuvers. What a lot of people don't know, I mean, and obviously the final scene does involve CGI for the Su-57 Felon fighter jet, right? For the dogfight. They're not going to do an actual dogfight. But what a lot of people don't know is a lot of the
Yeah.
FA-18s, right? Those are actually also computer generated. There's actually one part specifically where there's like, they show five fighters, no, four fighters, right? In formation flying into like the mission, right? There's actually only two real fighters there. And they did digital
Mm.
the other two. And the thing is that like the VFX artist they asked, he was like, which one of those was real? He's like, I don't know. I couldn't tell you, right? They are all very equally good. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that you can have authentic experiences and you can have AI augment them, much in the way that VFX augmented Top Gun Maverick. If you try to keep that constrained to only what you can film in real life, it's going to be a boring film. I'm going to put it out there right now.
Right.
You would
Right.
not have
This
the.
actually kind of Yeah, this actually kind of reminds me, I know I'm jumping a little bit, but it reminds me of something I wanted to talk about later on about AI and journalism. So there were a series of controversies. I think there was like the CNET scandal in which there were a bunch of articles that were published, written by AI.
Yeah,
I think BuzzFeed had a controversy, Sports Illustrated had controversy, MSN also had a controversy, basically about AI written things just being pushed out there as like written by a human being.
yeah.
So that brought me to a question that I had. So let's just say, and this is probably more for our listeners, if you knew that everything that you were receiving was written by AI and it was accurate, like a human being maybe worked with it to edit it, to fact check it, all that stuff, there were human eyes on it that reviewed it before it was published,
Sure.
would you be okay with that? Would that be something that people are more amenable to?
And you mean
And it has
specifically,
been it has been very transparently, clearly communicated that this was written by AI.
and you mean specifically by journalism for journalism, right?
Yeah, in the context of journalism, yes, not creative writing.
And this is actually like the to build off there. This is kind of an interesting point, which is like, you know, when I talk about how we work is going to change, journalism isn't going to die now as a result, right? Because AI can just write news articles. I think that what's going to happen is realistically the writing aspect is just going to be a little bit less important, right? Like whereas in the
Hmm.
past, journalists were expected to be able to write things and do stuff, right? And if you're working for like a very fact reporting oriented, or organization like Reuters or AP, for example, probably what's going to happen is that the journalists are going to be more doing research, again, working with an AI, right? An AI doesn't
Right.
know how to do it on its own, but they'll probably go out. I mean, they'll probably be the ones going out, maybe interviewing people, writing down notes, and then just throwing it into a bot. It's going to make news come out faster. I think whole articles and analysis.
Faster than it already is.
Exactly, right? Like, I mean, and it's a good question. Like, is that something that, readers are okay with? And I would actually make the argument. I don't want to insert things for our dear listeners here, right? Um, but I bet you that most people are going to be okay with it, right? It's one of the things
Yeah,
that you're
that
just not going to
that's
notice,
what I feel.
right?
That's what I feel. I feel like if it's nonfiction, it's news. I actually don't mind as much. I don't see an issue with that.
I mean, I forget the sense what's
If
probably.
and it's been told that they're transparent about it, I don't mind.
I bet you people won't even notice, right? One day it's gonna be like 10, 15 years down the road, you're reading your news and you'll realize that basically there's no actual human writing news anymore. It's just AIs now, right? And
Hmm.
is that a bad thing? I mean, this gets into deeper questions, like should we, I mean, is it bad that we are offloading all of our sort of our mental computation work to machines? I mean, this is the plot of the Matrix, right? In essence, at that point. Right.
Ignorance is bliss, Mr. Was it Mr. What was it? Forgot what he called him. Is Agent Smith
Agent Smith
was
is
talking to Neo,
Cypher. Well,
and he's eating a steak.
Mr. Anderson. Well, Mr. Anderson is Neo,
Mr. Anderson, thank you.
but Cypher is the one who talks to Agent Smith when he says ignorance is bliss, when he's deciding to betray Morpheus.
Oh, Cypher is the one saying. Okay, I forgot that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So just for a little bit of Matrix trivia, but so the whole plot of the Matrix is right that like humans offloaded everything to AIs and machines, and they kind of are getting fat themselves, right? Or Wall-E, I think is another one has a similar plot.
Yeah, that was Wally. Yeah.
Also in the
In the
Matrix.
Matrix, the we're used as batteries.
Well, no, it's in the Matrix too. It's in the Animatrix. It's the prequel to the Matrix.
Oh, I did
It's
not watch the prequel.
Yeah, there's a prequel. Fun fact, for those of you who didn't know, there's an anime prequel and a bunch of other films in there too. Generally speaking, my point though is that when it comes to like, is this a good thing? I can't answer that for you. I mean, that kind of gets into like, well, we don't really, ride horses anymore either. We drive cars. Is that a bad thing? I mean, most of
And
you,
now
most of you probably
and
aren't gonna.
now horseback riding is more of just like a
It's a
fun
sport.
little
Yeah.
sport, quite
Equestrian.
expensive sport.
Yeah, I mean, is it, is that a bad thing? I mean, I don't know. We also don't, handcraft shoes anymore. We just build them in factories. Is that a
But
bad
you
thing?
can still get handcrafted shoes for a premium.
Exactly. Exactly, right? Is this a bad thing? I don't know. This is a question that I think we as a society have not really reckoned with. And I think it's something that we as a society really should reckon with, which is that at what point are we just, what are we supposed to do beyond the point, right? And that's kind of like the deeper sort of question of when we've kind of,
Yeah, it's interesting. Hmm.
right, like when we've automated so much, what do humans do then, right? Are we just kind of useless meat bag then, right?
Useless meat bags. Yeah, well, it's interesting to me because you think about how many, things from the past that now kind of come at a premium. Now they're kind of like a luxury experience. So, like, for example, we have computers, but some people still like their typewriter. Right now we have pens and, again, computers, but some people still like to write with their fancy calligraphy pen that looks like a quill. We haven't had to use that in how many, maybe over a century, 2 centuries. I don't know when it was started, but it's
Arguably,
just one of those things where I feel like maybe at some point in the future where we're all going to kind of integrate AI into society and having writing that is complete.
he froze. I think he froze there for a second. Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
I think you froze. Yeah, you froze for a second.
Okay, well, I think I might have missed that last part, but to summarize, I think it sounds like that, like, as we integrate AI further into society, the question is like, you know, what becomes a premium slash, luxury experience. I mean, here's what I'm gonna say, right? Like, I think number one, we are thinking a little bit far ahead, right? Like now we're kind of getting into like the decades type of thing. It's something I suspect that
Hmm.
much further off than we actually realize. But there are more real questions, which is like, how much will AI really change writing? How do you Here's what I'm going to say, right? Like, I think that is that as for advice that is given for every industry, learn to work with it, right? Don't fight it.
Hmm.
Learn to work with it. I don't think anybody is going to be upset if, like I said about Top Gun Maverick, right? Everyone loved that film. People are not upset there's CG in there. I mean, the studio lied about it, but that's a different story. But, you know, people will be upset if the content coming to them is shit, right? That's
Right.
exactly why people don't like CGI in films is because it's shit CGI. If you have good content, nobody's really going to care if it's coming out of an AI or not, right? But
Right.
again, I think that the final question really is like sort of, as we kind of go into our final stage of this, right? The final question here really is like what becomes our role in a world, and this is a very broad question, I think, generally, right? What becomes our role in a world where increasingly machine intelligence, without really surpassing us in intelligence, but is still good enough to do a lot of tasks. Like journalism is a great example, right? I actually will argue that
Hmm.
journalism will probably get replaced pretty quickly by AI. And the journalist role will become more feeding the facts into the AI and making sure that they're real and cross-checking, right? Rather than writing.
Hmm.
So what becomes our
Editing.
editing too, right? What becomes our
Yeah.
role in a world in which increasingly we don't have as much to do as we did before, right? I think is question number one. That is me arguably some decades away still. And I think by the time that becomes a very real pressing concern, Zanker and I will probably be retired and old and our teeth will be falling out. Oh,
And we'll be like, well, we talked about that when we were
yeah.
younger.
We talked about that when we were younger, before holographic podcasts and VR porn was a thing.
I think about that all the time. And I'm like, when I have gray hair, like, what is the world going to look like? Because I think about it when I think of like my parents
Yeah,
or like even grandparents and like when you see how they interact with the tech that seems so natural to us,
yeah, yeah.
I'm just like, what's that version? What's that going to be for
I,
me?
for me, it's like I can't imagine growing up with a smartphone, right? Like
Me neither. Me
I
neither.
Because I got my first smartphone a little bit earlier, I think, than even people in my generation generally did. I got it in like ninth grade or eighth grade, something like that, right? Like right around the time it was really starting to take off. But
I
like,
didn't get a smartphone until I was in college.
right, I mean, that's actually more common too, by the way. A lot of people did. But high school or college, we kind of had to integrate it. Imagine being a kid who has a smartphone from the age of like 7 or 8. I mean,
I have so many thoughts on that, and none of them are in favor of giving a kid a smartphone at that
well,
age.
and that's kind of gets into like, attention and like how technology is breaking us in some ways. But and that's again, right? That's kind of what I'm talking about too, as part of that question. Think about how it's changing us too, right, dear listener, right? Like, we, those of you who are our age or older, you probably remember a time before all this. I know I do, right? I still remember dial-up internet, right, as an
Oh
example.
my God, the horrible sound.
Yeah, right.
Get off the phone. I need to use the internet.
Right, right. I still remember that, right? I remember that as a kid. I mean, I remember the age before the internet. I remember the idea of going to a library and looking things up. But like, the other thing to keep in mind is that, for those of us who are listening to this who are our age, like we're both like roughly 30 or so, or older,
Yeah.
you know, you probably are thinking about it from the perspective of like, well, yeah, I mean, like I don't know how my life is going to change. Imagine the kids who are still kids right now, right? Like they're 4 or 5
Yeah.
years old. And when they come of age, they're probably going to have very questionable skills, I think, coming out of it, right,
Hmm.
as a result. So that's an interesting thought as well, right? As a question to end on it. The second question I think to end on is like, you know, can we work with AI in a way that doesn't erase our value to society, right? And I think that there is a way to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that there is a way to do it. I don't think it's that scary as people think it is. But that said, it is going to be an adjustment, I think. I'm a big believer that we always have extreme views, and when things like this happen, there are going to be people who are like, nothing's going to happen. It's going to fizzle out. And then there are people who are like, running around, with like their,
Right. The two opposite ends of the spectrum.
yeah, and like they're like, we're just going to become like, batteries for the Matrix or something. The reality is going to be somewhere in between, which is that, I think
Yeah.
there will be some changes. I think there are going to be some jobs that,
And there will be growing pains.
yeah, absolutely. There's going to
Um,
be,
I feel the same as you. I think, there's definitely a way forward integrating AI into our lives. I think it's really inevitable. I
there,
mean, just if you were thinking about it in terms of business interests, financial interests, it's kind of inevitable.
there's too much at stake, right? I mean,
Exactly.
I mean that all, of course, precludes that like some other massive shock event doesn't happen, and this decade has certainly had a poor track record with that. I mean, like
Yeah.
I had Israel and Iran going to war this year on their bingo card. I know I didn't.
Yeah, I Marjorie Taylor Greene calling Trump out on social media about how that's a bad idea. Like I've never heard of her breaking with Trump.
Yeah, I mean, like the thing I think we need to keep in mind also, like when we talk about AI, we don't really know what's coming. There's a lot of things that are very questionable. The pandemic was a big proof of this, right? But people who predict
If
things,
anything, I feel like the pandemic kind of like supercharged technological advances because that was the only way people could communicate.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I've mentioned it before, I'm going to mention it again, right? People don't have as much spontaneity anymore, right? We schedule things over
Hmm.
Discord servers and then we meet in person. We do the thing and
Yeah.
leave. And it's really sad, actually, right? What's happened in that respect. But I think that the thing to keep in mind, like, right, is that when we see predictions, and I love economics explains point about this that nobody can predict the future, right? No, that's really true. We don't know what's going to happen, right? Like, black swan events have happened throughout history all the time. I mean, the Black
Hmm.
Plague completely
Oh my
changed the
God,
landscape
yeah.
of Western Europe, medieval Europe, right? Um,
Yeah.
our pandemic has arguably we still are not fully through the effects of it yet. Um, we don't know what's
And
going
I
to.
like how a lot of it kind of just disappeared. It disappeared in the discourse, but it didn't actually disappear. And I know this is not AI related, but I still was freaked out when I heard about long COVID. And like
Yeah,
that was one of the things that really for me when COVID happened, I couldn't understand people that were so cavalier about it. And they're like, oh, it's just like the flu, it's like fine, blah blah blah. And I'm like, no, this is
no,
literally a
like
brand new virus, and
virus.
we don't have decades of research understanding what its long-term impacts could be on the human body.
So,
Not to mention the fact that some viruses will just linger in your body for the rest of your life. You're never going to get rid of it.
well, so
And
there's two reasons for
yeah,
that.
so this is, hmm?
Well, there's two reasons for that. First of all, is I think as a species we're actually getting dumber. And I know I say this and it sounds very elitist to me to say.
Kunal's hot take. We're all getting dumber as a species.
I mean, you heard it first, the blind leading the blind. We are getting blinder. Like, right? Like, and it's very appropriate it's very apropos and very on point for this particular podcast. We're just getting dumber, right? I don't blame people here, right? It's because we've been gutting education. We've been deliberately sort of politicizing things that should not be politicized. On top of that, our leadership is deliberately lying to people at that time too, right? But we won't go down that rabbit hole too much. The problem, I think, for a lot of things is that we don't really fully, as a result, everyone doesn't have a very good grasp, right? But let me put it this way, right? I mean, this year alone, India and Pakistan almost went to nuclear war, right? It's something that people don't know about, but word on the street is that they were actually like getting ready to consider nuclear weapons in that exchange. Israel and Iran, we don't know how that's going to play out either. What
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say this in a doomsday sense, the world's about to end. Oh no, go get your nuclear preparation bunkers, get ready for Fallout, the game that is. But what I'm trying to say is that like be very careful of people who claim they know the future because we don't know. I mean, like there are any number of variables in play at any time, right? Will AI really replace everyone? I mean, the jury's still out on it, but we're already seeing the limitations pop up. I mean, they've already said that, like, hey, we're running out of data, and we're just getting more and more hallucinations and whatnot now. Uh,
Mm.
will AI just fizzle out? I mean, maybe. Will AI, you know, become just another thing that we just use? Seems pretty likely, right?
Yeah. I'm kind of in that camp. I don't think it's gonna fizzle out. I don't think it's gonna go anywhere. I think it's here to stay.
Yeah,
I think it's a tool that we're gonna use,
yeah. I mean, it's
and it's just
obviously
going to be, probably more progress will make, I mean, I guess I don't know if this is a hot take, but like more progress will probably be made in finding ways to effectively integrate AI into our lives, then there will be progress in AI like becoming smarter than human beings and like replacing us.
let me put like another another sort of end notes on this, right? Let me give you another crazy sort of idea of something that could happen. For all we know, right, maybe some special mineral is discovered on a planet near us, right? And now suddenly everyone just wants to go to space, right? Now suddenly
Yeah.
economics have changed completely, right? Now there's tons of
Yeah.
this, right? Because, there's so much that needs to get done.
Honestly, if there was a mineral that was discovered in space and it was like super cool and valuable, we wouldn't know about it.
But you get my point, right? Like, or maybe
Yeah. No, I'm just saying like they wouldn't tell us.
you never know, right? Like, I mean, my point, I think what I'm trying to say, right, is that never underestimate the ability of history to surprise you because there are a lot of,
That's a good quote. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I was watching an alternate history video on what if Genghis Khan just straight up did not exist. And it is shocking just how much, oh, his name is actually Genghis Khan or Temujin, I think was his actual like birth name.
Yep.
It is shocking just how fucking like integral that one man was to arguably the largest conquest in human history, and just
Hmm.
how much impact that had on the globe.
Hmm.
Right.
Even the Black Plague, I recently finished a book on it, like at the beginning of this year. The Black Plague, it completely changed the whole financial structure of all of Europe.
Right.
Yeah.
Imagine if the Black Plague was more fatal, right? It would completely change the world again, right?
Yeah.
There's
Yep.
there's a lot here that I think that like you just don't know. And I would argue kind of like more of a more philosophical note, just take it as it comes kind of thing, right? Like we don't
Yeah.
you can't really plan for things beyond a point. I mean, I think that's one of the things we really learned in the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just take things as they go. It's good to be aware. It's, good to think about it, but,
Yeah, just don't stick your head up your ass.
you know,
As I said,
ration your worry. Ration your worry.
and the times you put your head in your ass.
Yeah.
It's important.
Oh
You
man.
don't want neck cramps.
No, that's not good. That cramps suck. If there's anything you take away from our podcast, it would be that.
You're not stick your head. It might cause breathing trouble. It might cause neck cramps. See your doctor. See your doctor if you cannot remove your head from your ass. Blindly to the blind
Oh man.
want to stick your head in your ass. All right,
Yeah,
everyone.
right?
Well, on that note,
Well, Yeah, thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our discussion on writing and AI. We hope that you found this to be interesting, educational. Any of the questions that we posed to you during this episode, please engage with us in the comments below.
Like,
What's your
subscribe, and share.
takeaway? Yeah, like, subscribe, share.
Answers, please let us know your take.
Yes, you guys especially.
Definitely. Patrick Rothfuss, please finish your third novel.
Yeah, right. Oh my God, I swear, Kunal, if we get one of these authors that we mentioned to finally listen to our podcast, I'm gonna like throw a little party.
Dude, if our Rudy listens, he's gonna be like, dude, are you calling me a plagiarizer?
Yeah,
Plagiarizer?
I know it's gonna be like, oh my God.
Really very. I mean, in his defense, I'm not calling him a plagiarizer. I'm just noting that. But anyways, our Rudy, I hope you know I love you, man. Okay,
All right, thank
everyone.
you for tuning in. We'll catch you guys next time.
Catch you all next time. Remember to stay away from New Jersey. Have fun, y'all. Live a good life.